Welcome back to World History. This is Kim Groves, and I'm hoping that you had a chance to check out my first introductory video that sort of laid out what we're going to be talking about. Excuse me here while I'm adjusting my microphone a little bit. Having a toddler, or not toddler, a 7-year-old, she tends to like to play with my stuff, so everything tends to get a little wonky at times, so just excuse that. Today we're going to start right in with our chapter 1, what I'm calling chapter 1, the rise of civilization, and we're going to be working on a lesson 1, which is early humans. So here is our agenda for today. We're going to learn some basic vocabulary pertaining to prehistory, the importance of religion in Neolithic cultures, key aspects of developing civilizations, major archaeological finds from prehistory, how Ice Age affected human migration, and the importance of art in Paleolithic cultures. So these are all kind of very important things. And again, we're going to be moving kind of slowly, much more slowly than we probably would in a traditional classroom that has to pace themselves to cover a set amount of time in like 180 days or whatever. So we can cover a lot more ground. Excuse me for looking down. I got my new pointer, so I just want to make sure I'm pushing the right button. So I'm still kind of getting used to this one. So as you can see here, I've got some, I've got a Homo sapiens, and I've got a Homo habilis, and I've got some cave paintings, and we're going to talk about these a little bit in more detail, but I just want to kind of give you an idea of what we're going to be looking at. So today, we're going to dive feet first into the world as it stood during the prehistoric era, beginning with some key vocabulary we need to understand in order to move forward. So our vocabulary, first word is prehistory. So prehistory is basically just the time before writing was developed. And right here you're going to see this is a stone tablet with what is called cuneiform writing, and we're going to talk about that in about, I don't know, another couple of sections. So I think it's like 2 lessons from now we're going to talk about cuneiform when we talk about Sumerians. So, but again, I just want to show you this is prehistory is strictly the time before writing was developed. A theory. Anybody who's ever took basic science understands a theory is a system of ideas intended to explain something. So since there was nothing written down, we have to go on what was left behind to create a theory of what the world was like during this time period. Archaeology, and this is the study of past societies through analysis of what people left behind. And we're going to delve into 2 different sciences having to do with prehistory and history in general, and we're going to discuss them in a little deeper detail, so I'm just going to gloss over them at the moment just to give you a basic idea. So the study of past societies through analysis of what people left behind. We still study archaeology today because we're always finding stuff people left behind. One of my funniest stories happened, this was about, oh my gosh, I was working retail, and I was working at one of those larger home improvement warehouses. It was the one that has the blue coloring, and it happened to be across the street from an old a hotel. And they were tearing down the hotel to build like a mini strip mall section. And as they had torn the old hotel down, and they were digging the foundations for the new little mini mall, it was like a Bed Bath & Beyond and a Marshalls and something else there, Ross, I think. They dug down the foundations and they ran across some bodies, and of course this freaked everybody out. The construction workers completely stopped. All of a sudden, one of the guys who worked outside comes running and saying, "The police are across the street." And then all of a sudden everybody's running outside excuse me. And come to find out, they had to call the Historical Society down, and they found out that this was actually an unknown burial plot of one of the founding families of our area. So it was kind of cool that they actually had to stop work on this mini mall for like about 2.5 months while they excavated the area. So again, sort of how archaeology is still being done today. Anthropology. This is the study of human life and culture, and here this is everything that's under the umbrella of anthropology. So archaeology, cultural anthropology, biological anthropology, and linguistic anthropology. So they kind of pile archaeology under anthropology because archaeology and anthropology do sort of come together at certain points, but they are distinct disciplines within scientific circles. The next one is hominid. A hominid, a human-like creature that walked upright, and this is a hominid skull. So it's a human-like creature that walked upright. Now, I'm not saying that these were apes, they were human-like. So they probably leaned closer to humans than they did to apes. So as you can see, this looks more or less like a human skull, but there were some significant differences. Homo sapiens sapiens, that is not a typo. That is not a typo. Homo sapiens sapiens. Homo sapiens sapiens are basically modern humans. It means wise human. And this hominid appeared in Africa between 200,000 and 1.5 million years ago, or 1,500,000 years ago, and replaced populations of earlier hominids in Europe and Asia. The out of Africa theory. It doesn't mean that the continent of Africa like ran out or something like that. This is the theory that one group of early humans moved from Africa and replaced the Neanderthals of Europe and Asia. And please forgive that car if you heard it. I am really sorry. Apparently people like to use my street as a drag strip. Now, remember I said earlier we're going to talk about archaeology versus anthropology and how they are different. They are very different disciplines, like I said, but they do intersect. Many people may get the terms archaeology and anthropology mixed up or even use them interchangeably. The fact is, they are in fact two completely different scientific disciplines that do at times intersect. Both archaeologists and anthropologists have developed their own unique scientific methods to carry out their work. Their examination and analysis gives us a better understanding of ancient societies, and not so ancient societies. Again, there are archaeologists constantly at work studying even things that happened 100 years ago or 150 years ago. 100 years ago would literally be like the 1920s, and that just shakes me considering that my grandparents were born in like 1913. Archaeology, again, is the study of the things, the physical artifacts made and left behind by humans. This also includes their physical remains. Anthropology is the study of the human life and culture. Culture includes what people wear, how their society is organized, and what they value. They use the artifacts and fossils to create a picture of people's everyday lives. Again, this is where archaeology and anthropology merge together because anthropologists use the artifacts found by archaeologists to build a complete picture of what exactly a culture and a society was like. So one cannot exist without the other. So neither one can exist in a vacuum. How do we date artifacts and fossils? No, we don't take them out for coffee and dessert or even take them to a nice Italian restaurant. Before we get into how we date artifacts, we need to understand why we date artifacts. And it may seem like, well, okay, that seems like a really silly question. Dating artifacts and fossils helps us not only understand when the first humans lived, but where they lived, okay? Because remember, every area has its own unique set of conditions. So by looking at those artifacts, we are able to determine not only when that group of people lived, but how they lived and where they lived. There are several ways we can determine the age of an artifact. The first way is through radiocarbon dating, and the second way is through thermoluminescence. And I'm going to explore each of those methods in just briefly. Okay, remember, I am not a scientist scientist. I am in a laboratory mixing chemicals kind of way. I'm more of a social scientist. I study history, I study politics, I dabble in archaeology and anthropology, I dabble in psychology and sociology. So those are my wheelhouses. So I don't sit in a lab and mix chemicals, and not that kind of scientist. So I don't understand the chemical composition of this, but I do understand it enough to know how it works. The first one is radiocarbon dating, and it's been around, seems like forever. I mean, it was a big thing when I was in school, when I was in middle and high school. So radiocarbon dating that's the first way that we can determine the age of an artifact. All living things, including you and me, absorb a small amount of radioactive carbon called carbon-14, abbreviated C14. Carbon is found in every living thing, okay? Only living things have carbon in them, okay? Non-living things cannot have carbon in them. If it was once living, it can have carbon. But if it is not living, it cannot have, if it was never living, it cannot have carbon. My cell phone here was never living, therefore it cannot have carbon in it. Now we absorb this carbon-14 from the atmosphere. After that living thing dies, it slowly releases that carbon-14 in a predictable, measurable amount. By measuring the amount of carbon-14 or C14 left in a once living object, scientists can figure out the age of an object. Now this method does have its drawbacks, as it can only reliably measure the age of an object no more than 50,000 years old. Now that is because you get into half-lives, because it is radioactive. Without getting into a very big explanation of how radioactivity works, basically half of the radioactive molecules will basically dissipate in a certain amount of time, and then half of those molecules will dissipate in a certain amount of time, and so forth and so on, until there's none of those molecules left. So that's like the very short explanation of how the radiocarbon dating system works. And basically we've determined that C14 will actually no longer be present after about 50,000 years or so. The second method is more reliable in dating objects back to about 200,000 years, and that is thermoluminescence. Thermoluminescence uses, basically it works by measuring the light given off by electrons trapped in the soil surrounding the artifact. So basically what has to happen is it is measured when the object is in what is called in situ, which is when it's still in the ground, okay, or when they may take a core of soil from around the object and capture it, so they can take it back to the laboratory that way, and they can actually measure the electrons, and that is reliably dating things back to about 200,000 years ago. Beyond that, we get into sort of best guesses. Now, we also can learn a lot from what organic remains can tell us. Archaeologists use methods that make any fan of mystery shows proud. They can analyze microscopic organic remains like blood, hair, and plant tissues on tools and weapons. This gives them a lot of information. Analysis shows us that molecules like blood can survive for millions of years. The discovery is particularly important because it can tell us more about humans, their use of tools, and the animals that they killed. Additionally, ancient DNA provides new information on human evolution. The evidence of plant remains gives us evidence on the history of farming, and these scientific techniques give us insight into the lives of early people. Now, about, oh my gosh, I'd say 25 or 30 years ago, maybe? No, it wouldn't have been 30 years ago, probably about 25 years ago. They had made this discovery of of this remains of this mead drink in somewhere in Asia. And there was a local brewery in Delaware called Dogfish Head. And the scientists had actually sent a sampling that they had found, these organic remains, a sample of it to Dogfish Head to see if they could make it and figure out what this mead, this wine, tasted like. And Dogfish Head was able to reliably recreate it, and they actually bottled it up and sold it, and I think they called it Midas Touch. And to taste something that was thousands of years old was incredible, and it was actually pretty good. But they found these scrapings on the insides of these clay jars. So again, this is what organic remains can tell us. Now we're going to talk about the early development. We have learned more and more in recent decades about how humans developed. However, every new find means we may have to revise our ideas about prehistoric humans. We're going to briefly examine the development of modern humans. The first group we're going to talk about is the Australopithecus. I can't even say it. The first human-like creature we can identify was called Australopithecus, which means southern ape. It was named by Donald Johanson, who discovered it. It flourished in eastern and southern Africa, and one of the most significant finds of Australopithecus was made on July 17, 1959, when Mary Leakey made the dramatic discovery of a nearly complete Australopithecus skull in the Olduvai Gorge in East Africa. It was the oldest fossil ever found up to that time, dated to a staggering 1.8 million years old. And here you have Mary and her husband Louis Leakey, and what they believe Australopithecus looked like. And here they are holding the skull of their find. The next hominid we're going to look at is Homo habilis. Homo habilis appeared approximately 2.5 to 1.6 million years ago. It was a more advanced hominid with a somewhat larger developed brain. Now, I don't want you to think that one group stopped and a new group started. It's like all groups were still kind of merging together, but we see consistency in the development, the appearance of these different groups of hominids. So where they're not just a one-off, they're actually consistently found. So it was a more advanced hominid with a somewhat larger developed brain. Homo habilis means handy human. This name may have been given because there is evidence that they may have used stone tools. So maybe you could call this Tim the Toolman Taylor of the hominid world. Homo erectus. Homo erectus, or upright human, emerged about 1.5 million years ago. Now, while Homo erectus was not the first hominid that walked on two legs, Homo erectus had arms and legs in modern human proportion. Homo erectus remains found in Asia show that this hominid was probably the first to leave Africa. So again, Homo erectus, not the first to walk upright, but certainly the first to have their arms and their legs in proportion to modern humans. So we're getting closer and closer and closer to what we see as modern humans. Homo sapiens sapiens, and one of these pictures here, this redhead, that is actually Neanderthal, and I threw that in there for a reason, and you'll see that in just a moment. Homo sapiens sapiens emerged about 250,000 years ago. Homo sapiens sapiens means wise human, and appeared in Africa between 200,000 and 150,000 years ago. They spread out into the rest of the world about 100,000 years ago, and this is called the out of Africa theory. One of the first groups they encountered were Neanderthals, our little red-headed friend here. Neanderthals seem to be the first early people to bury their dead. So you're going to start seeing where some of these groups are going to start combining and picking up each other's cultural habits. By 30,000 BC, Homo sapiens had replaced the Neanderthals. They had either died out due to conflicts with Homo sapiens sapiens, or they had intermingled with Homo sapiens sapiens, as evidenced by the fact that some individuals have remnants of Neanderthal DNA in their ancestry, including myself. So I had my ancestry run about 3 or 4 years ago, and it turns out that I had some Neanderthal DNA. And I'm like, ooh, well, that tracks, because they actually figured out that most people that have red hair, and I used to have red hair before I went gray, actually do have a higher percentage of Neanderthal DNA, and Neanderthal tended to have lighter colored hair. So that kind of tracked with how I, what I looked like before, I went gray. Now, human movement. We've discussed briefly the out of Africa theory. And if you see here on the map, the red area is where we saw a lot of that first human development. It was in the eastern and southern parts of Africa. The spread of the first modern humans, the Homo sapiens sapiens, was a slow process. They moved over the globe in a search for food and new hunting grounds. In a whole generation, maybe perhaps 30 years, which would have been a generation, they moved only a couple or 3 miles. Over tens of thousands of years, it ended up being enough to populate the world. Today, all humans on the planet belong to the same subgroup of humans. We are all Homo sapiens sapiens. Excuse me. Okay, now we're going to discuss the Paleolithic Age. The term Paleolithic Age is used to designate the early period of human history from approximately 2,500,000 BC to about 10,000 BC. During this time, humans used simple tools. The term Paleolithic comes from the Greek words meaning old stone. Therefore, the Paleolithic Age is sometimes called the Old Stone Age. Paleolithic people relied on hunting and gathering, as well as had a close relationship with their environment. The people sustained themselves through the use of stone tools. They would use one type of stone to chip away at another type of stone, creating a sharp edge. Hand axes were common, and spears were eventually created. Paleolithic hunters eventually developed better tools like the bow and arrow for hunting and the harpoon and fishhook for fishing. So in here you see a selection of Paleolithic tools, stone tools that were discovered. Paleolithic migration. Paleolithic people followed animal migration patterns, making them nomads. That is a group of people who move from place to place. Archaeologists and anthropologists believe they lived in groups of 20 to 30 people. Their main job was finding enough to eat. They just needed to survive. They would watch animal migration patterns and pass this knowledge to their children. Since both men and women were responsible for acquiring food, many anthropologists believe there was equality between them. It is highly likely both men and women made decisions that affected the activities of the group. Fire's huge. As early hominids moved from warmer regions into colder regions, they needed to adjust for new climate conditions. Archaeologists have discovered remains of piled ashes in caves that prove Paleolithic people used fire systematically as long as 500,000 years ago. At a northern China site, the remnants of hearths, ashes, charcoal, and charred bones have been dated to 400,000 years ago. And fire had about 4 major purposes. Fire gave warmth. Fire kept wild animals away from the campsite. Fire was a gathering place to trade stories and build a culture. And fire was allowed meat to be cooked. I don't know about you, but I don't like my food raw unless it's my veggies. Continuing on with fire, number 4 on the list, the concept that fire allowed meat to be cooked had a ripple effect. Fire and the idea of cooking food meant food tasted better, lasted longer, and was easier to chew and digest, which made it likely that nutrition improved. The Ice Ages. Okay, we had many ice ages. Heat sources were especially important when Ice Age conditions descended on the Paleolithic world. The last ice age began about 100,000 BC and ended about 8,000 BC. During this time, thick sheets of ice covered parts of Europe, Asia, and North America. As sea levels went down, people were able to migrate across land bridges that had not existed before. Since Ice Age conditions posed a serious threat to human life, the ability to adapt was crucial. And so here you see a map of the various Ice Ages. Now we're going to get ready to finish up here briefly. So I just wanted to finish up with Paleolithic art. Paleolithic people did more than just survive. They actually left a huge cultural legacy, and you're going to hear my printer going off in the background. The cave paintings of Lascaux in southern France and Altamira in northern Spain bear witness to their legacy. The Chauvet cave, discovered in southern France in 1994, contained about 300 paintings of lions, oxen, owls, panthers, and other animals. Now, you have to understand that most of these animals were not hunted, which means they were most likely painted for decorative or religious purposes. So this is important. You have to understand decorative or religious purposes. So once we have the concept of fire, we're cooking food, we have begun the process of settling down for extended periods of time. We have maybe started living in caves, so we're not as nomadic. I'm not saying we're not nomadic, but we're not as nomadic. So we're starting to lay down roots. And so we're able to have, I wouldn't call it free time, but there is time for people to engage in cultural pursuits like cave paintings. And to paint for decorative or religious purposes means that there is a cultural understanding of the environment, and that there is somehow, in some way, a religious culture beginning to develop among these Paleolithic peoples. Maybe they're not understanding how birds can fly, and why some animals survive better in the winter, and what happens during hibernation. They're trying to understand the world around them. And so this is leading to the rise of a type of religion, very rudimentary type of religion, but a religion nonetheless. And also painting for decorative purposes. Now, to light these caves, obviously, since we did not have Edison and his light bulbs, and I'm pretty sure that Con Ed and BG&E were not around at that point, artists used lamps filled with animal fat, and artists painted using their fingers and twigs, and even blew paint through hollow reeds. Mineral oil ores mixed with animal fat comprised the paint, and the animals were realistically painted, which is, and I'm going to show you, the next slide is going to have examples from Lascaux, Altamira, and Chauvet. They were fairly realistically painted, which meant that the Paleolithic people had a good eye for what they were seeing. They were able to translate, their brains were able to translate what they were seeing, and they were able to translate that into what they were able to put on the cave walls. The colors they used were primarily red, yellow, and black. Now, few humans do appear in these paintings, and when they do, they are drawn as a stick-like figure, which means the humans are not the focus of the painting. It's actually the animal. So it shows you that there's very much a cult or culture built around animals. So, which is understandable considering that they moved in a way that, where they were tracking the movement of animals, because they were a hunter-gatherer society. So this actually does make sense if you look at it in that respect. This has led some anthropologists to believe the work was done for magical or religious reasons to bring success in hunting. So if you see a big oxen or a large buffalo drawn, maybe this was a magical wish that they would bring in a big buffalo because they would use all parts to sustain the tribe, as it were, or the group. And so here are some paintings from Lascaux, Chauvet, and Altamira. And notice how relatively realistic they look. These are not rudimentary by any stretch of the imagination. These are very realistic. Though they are two-dimensional, they accurately reflect what the Paleolithic peoples were actually seeing. So again, this is not a rudimentary type of painting. These aren't stick figures. I mean, they're drawing better than I do, and that, you know, I'm a horrible artist. So, I mean, I think my 7-year-old draws better than I do. But again, these are drawings that are actually quite fantastic, and very, very realistic and true to what was actually seen out in during the Paleolithic era. So again, this is a huge find for archaeologists and anthropologists. Archaeologists and anthropologists are able to use this information to actually determine what was around animal-wise during this time frame. Now, I hope you enjoyed this this video. I will be putting out one on my American history next. And here's the ways you can contact me. Again, my email, comment on the video, visit my website. I will have a set of questions regarding this video listed under my World History website in Google Drive, and you can like, comment, and subscribe. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you know when I do drop those new videos. And I do hope to see you again and hear from you on my next American History video series. Thank you, and you all have a great day.